I'm Eva, and this is my co-host Thistle, and we would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. It has been so long. Oh my gosh. I apologize for the unintentional break, followed by the intentional break when I went home for Christmas. My cat Moth got very sick, and I ended up needing to spend all of my time and energy nursing her, and she's fine. She has made a full recovery, but when I brought her home from the emergency vet, her prognosis was only 50-50, so I was not in the mood to do anything knitting related while I was afraid that my kitty might not make it. But yeah, so she is great now. She's sitting on her cat tree drinking. She might come over. She knows her name. But so for returning viewers, welcome. I apologize for making you wait so long for another episode. And for new viewers, here's Moth. For new viewers, thanks so much for giving me a try. I tend to go into quite a bit of detail about my knitting, so if that's something that you enjoy, then this might be a podcast for you. Or if you just enjoy seeing out of focus puppy faces, that works too. Hi, sweetheart. Okay, so as I was saying, it has been probably a month since I recorded, and so I'm feeling a little out of practice. And so rather than do a lot of segments like that I usually do, like the yarn reviews and knits in the wild and that kind of thing, I thought that I would just keep it simple and basic so that I can get back in the habit and hopefully get back on the normal schedule soon. Sorry, out of practice. Okay, so I have a few finished objects to share with you. The first one I am wearing, this is my Husaka cowl. Yeah, I know. Which is a self-designed pattern, and it's named after water spirits of Central Europe, I would say. You might say Eastern Europe. Like, well, I don't know if they have them, but you know, the opera is by a Czech writer. What do we call opera? Composer. A Czech composer. I clearly did not drink enough tea today. Anyway, but yeah, and I was inspired to name it after that because I was rereading Dancing Goddesses, which is a really wonderful kind of archaeology, history, but very readable for a general audience work of nonfiction that is all about kind of the role of women and dancing and magical thinking in historic Europe with a focus on that kind of central region, kind of Greece up. And so yeah, so that is what I was inspired by. And I actually knit this twice. The first time was back in the spring. So if you've seen it, if you watch my podcast regularly, you've probably seen it before. And I got this yarn for my birthday. It was my gift to myself, so it's not like anyone got it for me. But it is, I think, 85% Polworth and 15% silk, something like that. It's from Blue Moon Fiber Arts. And it is the Tempest colorway. It's being lightened there, but that is quite true to color. And I got it because I'd never knit with Polworth before. They're a breed of sheep that came from a merino cross, and I really love it. It's bouncy and soft, and those are two things I really love about yarn, especially for things that are going to be around my neck. Okay, so I knit it vertically as if it was a scarf. I did a provisional cast on, and then I just grafted it at the end. So I'll show you the stitches this way first. I really wanted it to look identical on both sides because I don't want to have to worry about how I'm wrapping my cowl. We were doing so well with focus, guys. So I found the stitch pattern for the body in the Barbara Walker Stitch Treasury. Oh, come on. There we go. And it's called Indian Cross Stitch. I have no idea why. And I don't really like that name because, I don't know, it smacks of casual racism, but that's what it's called. And it's a garter stitch based stitch, so that's why it looks pretty much the same on both sides. It's not completely identical because there's an even number of rows between these crosses, so you're always crossing on the same side. But for functional reasons, it might as well be identical. And what's nice is you do 4 or 6. I was knitting this quite recently. You would think I would remember. Anyway, there's quite a few rows where all you're doing is garter, and then there are 2 rows where you're doing the crosses. The first row you wrap for each stitch you wrap the yarn 3 times around your needle instead of once, so you end up with these really long stitches. And then on the second row, which is the only fiddly one, you cross them. And my project notes include a link to the stitch pattern so that if you're interested, you can hear more details about that. I will say that, so when I knit this in the spring, the reason why it didn't work out, and I knit all of this yarn, plus a little more, is I had made this body part much wider. And I don't know, it was about that wide, which is the width that my alpaca cowl that I love is. But of course, alpaca is very drapey, and a bouncy Polworth with only a little bit of silk content is not drapey. So, sorry, Thistle is trying to figure out how to get to the cat food in the cat tree. Okay, you don't need to hear more about the rambles of the adventures of my pets. Come up. But as I was saying, so it ended up way too wide to be wearable. And so I ended up ripping it all out, and then I cast on again with half the amount of stitches here in the body. So that's why I had to knit it twice. And then for the border, I was kind of poking around on Ravelry, and I found a Purl Soho pattern for a scarf called, I think, Rushing Rivulet, something like that. And it has these wonderful reversible cables. And it turns out, and this was something that I learned for this project, there they are. To make a cable reversible, all you need to do is do it in ribbing instead of stockinette. And then it has to be an even cross, if that makes sense. So I was inspired by them to do it in 1x1 twisted rib. And in order to make it look a bit more water-like, I alternated the crosses. So I crossed every 6 rows and then every 12 rows, all the way around. There's one place where I accidentally did 2 6 rows in one after each other, and I decided it was not worth ripping back. There it is. So I kind of like that. It adds a little bit of quirkiness to it. So I did a provisional cast on, and I did the provisional cast on basically in the middle of one of these garter stitch panels because I figured that would be the easiest way to graft. I'm sorry, Moth. You don't like hearing about the knitting. And so then when I got to the end, all I had to do was, for the body, was just graft the way you would for like a toe, the toe of a sock, because I made sure that it was 2 purl rounds meeting each other, if that makes sense. For the ribbing, I sat down to start grafting, and then I realized that I'd never grafted in rib before, so I had to look up a tutorial. It turns out it's not that difficult, so that was a relief. And I would show you where I grafted, but I can't actually find it, which I'm quite proud of, because in the past when I've tried to graft things like this versus socks, my tension has always been a bit of an issue. But I don't know, I did really well this time. If I can find it, I'll take a photo of it and include it on the project page. Okay, so it took about 500 yards, a little over 500 yards, and this yarn is sold in 700 yard skeins. So I'm currently making a matching pair of mitts, and as you can see, this is the length I like cowls so that you can wrap them twice for kind of style. And then when it's really cold out, I have a very short neck, but when it's cold, I don't care that I look ridiculous. So you can do it a 3rd time, and it keeps the wind out. I will measure, I did not measure the length, but I will measure the length and include that on my project page as well, just in case that's useful information. Of course, everyone is going to feel differently about length, depending on how long your neck is and how broad your shoulders are and that kind of stuff. But this worked for me. I have not blocked it yet because I have just been wearing it so much. I really love the color, so I'm really happy. And the mitts I don't think are going to take very much yarn, so I'll have to see what to do with the very leftovers. But yeah, so I'm really pleased about this project. It's one of the projects I took for my trip home for Christmas, which I go for a little over 2 weeks. And, excuse me, and so I took this project, just begun, like I had only done the cast on and maybe 3 rows because I wanted to I didn't want to have to fuss with a provisional cast on when I was talking to my family. So I took this project, I took the next project, which you'll see, and then I took some of the Miss Limone jumper, which is lace weight sweater, so that goes very slowly. And it turned out to be just the right amount of knitting. So I think I knit, let's see, around 1,000 yards plus maybe 400 on the sweater. So yeah, around 1,500 yards in 2 weeks. But I taught my family and I, my mom, sister, niece, and I just talk a lot, and then we watch movies and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of knitting time. I have to begin a new segment, and then I will be back. I forgot to mention, I'm considering writing this up as a free pattern. I know I said that about a shawl I knit in the spring of last year, but it turned out that shawl was quite complicated to write out, whereas this would be fairly simple. So if you are interested in that, let me know, and when I have the time, which might not be for another few months, no promises, basically is what I'm saying, I will try to type that up. If you don't need a lot of hand holding, everything I did is on my project page, so you could replicate it from that. But, you know, I'll try to make it an official pattern one of these days. Okay, so my next project, I wanted to have something that was just plain vanilla knitting. And I also wanted to do the Christmas Eve cast on, which is from Danny of Little Bobbins, she was the first video podcast that I found, and she is still one of my very favorites. Bobbins is her puppy, and now she has a cat that kind of looks like Moth, too. It's exciting. I'm a bit of a fangirl of Danny. Anyway, so I have been wanting to make another pair of knee-high socks for a while, and a very kind knitting friend sent me a skein of West Yorkshire spinners in the Wood Pigeon colorway, which is one of their self-patterning yarns. I love it. And so I thought that would be perfect for knee-high socks because that way you're just doing, you know, in the round, so you're less likely to get annoyed that it's taking forever, and it's working up into a really pretty pattern. So here they are. No, I do not have legs this long. It's because there's so much negative ease built into them. But as you can see, I wasn't really sure how much yardage I would need. I wanted these, if possible, to go over the knee and then to be able to fold down if I wanted them to be shorter. So I had a 100-gram skein of the self-patterning yarn, which is West Yorkshire Spinners in Wood Pigeon. I think my camera is just cranky because I got a new camera for Christmas that I've been playing with on Instagram. So I guess my old camera has its feelings hurt. Let's see. Slowly, there we go. So you can see the colors. There. They're kind of purples and pinks and blues, and I love them. And then the cuff is also West Yorkshire Spinner in Pennyroyal, which is designed to go with Wood Pigeon. As you can see, it's the same as this purple. And that was also sent to me as a gift by a very kind knitting friend. I don't know if she wishes to remain anonymous or not, but so I thought these were doubly appropriate for a Christmas Eve cast on because pretty much all the yarn was gifted. And so I had 20 grams of this, so 10 grams of each. And as you can see, I used it all on the cuff. And since I didn't know, I wanted to make sure I wouldn't run out of self-patterning yarn too early, and I also didn't want to have short cuffs. I wanted long cuffs. So for the heels and toes, I just used some white yarn that I had in my stash, which is Cascade Heritage Silk, which is superwash merino plus some silk. And I had used that to make a pair of striped socks, but I had a lot left over. So contrast sock heels and toes in that yarn. And I did them toe up so that I would be able to make them as long as possible, but I actually didn't even need all of the self-patterning yarn. I used about 75 grams of the 100-gram skein, and I stopped when it was just below my kneecap, so that, because I wanted the cuff to be able to go over my knee or to be able to fold it down and make them shorter right at my knee. That seemed, and I didn't want to fold down the self-patterning because that looks different. So yeah, I ended up, since I was doing toe up, I ended up doing, you know, a few increases and then trying it on, and 56 stitches ended up working out to be the magic number for me. I wear a size 6.5 to 7 US shoe, which is a UK, oh, I don't know the UK one, but it's a European 37. So, and I don't knit a lot of plain vanilla socks. I've knit one other pair. And it always surprises me how few stitches I need, because when I'm doing patterning socks, I tend to do between 60 and sometimes 64 if there are cables. But yeah, with vanilla, these fit great. And I didn't even do any calf shaping. I had brought extra needles so that I could go up in needle size. And I also could have increased a few stitches. But I kept trying it on, and it kept stretching over my calf. I have a pretty significant difference between my calf and ankle. There are, I think, 5 inches difference. I think my ankle's around 8 inches and my calf is around 13. So it really surprised me that I didn't need to do any shaping, but all of this negative ease, first of all, is why it gets a lot shorter when you wear it. It lets it stay up without any issues. I wore these for a whole day where I was walking around, doing grocery shopping, that kind of thing, and I did not wear them over tights. I wore them over bare legs just to, you know, give them the hardest possible test of slouchiness, and they stayed up perfectly well the whole time. I didn't have to adjust them once, so that was pretty exciting. I will say that the stripes get a little distorted over my calf because, you know, that's what you're doing. But I still think they look nice, and I am really excited about wearing them. This was my first time using West Yorkshire Spinners, this yarn of theirs, which is their classic sock yarn, I think. Something about sock yarn. It's a blend of nylon, unspecified wool, and blue face Leicester, and it's made in their mill in Yorkshire, as you would expect from the name. I have to admit, it is some of the coarser sock yarn that I've used. It didn't bother my feet and my ankles when I was running my errands, but I definitely felt it around my calf. It wasn't like I didn't pull them off, so obviously it wasn't that bad, but I could definitely feel, I wouldn't say itchy, but more of a prickle. No, sorry. Thistle is just determined to be a distraction today. So I would not recommend this yarn if you are very sensitive to wool, because I'm not sure if it would be wearable for you or not, and it would be very sad to have unwearable socks. But if you're used to the kind of German sock yarns, that's what this reminds me of. So like Regia and what's the other German one I've used? Zitron. I would say that this yarn is in their family. And I usually wear knee-high socks over tights anyway because it's winter and my thighs get cold too under skirts. So it shouldn't be a big issue, but just something to know. I absolutely love how the yarn knit up. I love the colors. I love the patterning. And my family thought it was absolute magic. They've seen self-striping yarn before, but not the kind that does the little patterning. And so it was kind of fun. And yeah. So these have a lot of good memories in them because I had a really nice trip home. Let's take a drinking break. I'm going to start another segment and show you my last finished object for this episode. And then I will be talking a little bit about things I've learned in 2016 and the types of knitting I envision myself doing in 2017. The last finished object I'm going to talk about this week, still haven't figured out what I'm going to do about all the Christmas finished objects and a couple ones that I finished and stayed in Texas. Anyway, is my Miss Phryne cardigan. Started out as a jumper and then I changed my mind. So I finished this before I left for Texas, but the buttons had not arrived. So I went ahead and sewed on the buttons yesterday, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I managed to sew the buttons to the inside of the button band, 9 buttons, which I did not notice until I went to put the sweater on. Yeah, so then I got to cut all the buttons off, which was mildly terrifying because I didn't want to cut my knitting. Managed to not cut the knitting because, you know, you do blending yarn. Anyway, so I cut them all off and re-sewed them on, and so I got to wear it for a Compline service I went to at my church last night. So here are the naughty buttons. I'm really pleased with them. You'll just have to accept that everything is lighter than in real life when I get it this close to the camera. So these are vintage glass buttons that I got from an Etsy seller who is in Germany, which is why they took a while to get here. I can't tell you exactly how long they took because obviously I wasn't in town for a couple weeks, so they were just there when all of my held mail got delivered. I can't remember what I've told you about this sweater and what I haven't. So, apologies for any redundancy. It is made out of canopy fingering yarn from the Fiber Company, which is a fingering weight yarn that is merino, baby alpaca, and bamboo. I think it's 40-30-30. And it's the sarsaparilla colorway, which is a really beautiful, cool, almost purpley brown. I absolutely love the drape of this yarn. I knitted up at 7.5 stitches to the inch because I wanted something that would be pretty cohesive. And it's really weird because when I was knitting with the yarn, it was really soft. It was just delicious to knit with. When I knit up the swatch, it felt really soft. I was really excited, and then I put the sweater on for the first time, and it was making my arms crawl. Like, you know how when you put on something really itchy, your skin starts to crawl? So that was a bit of a surprise. And part of it, I think, and I consulted, my sister is a dermatologist. So I consulted her about whether a lack of moisturizing could make things feel itchier, because I've had more issues with yarn, like sweaters that I wore last year without any problems, feeling itchier this year. And I thought maybe it was because I have not really been moisturizing and, you know, just dry up here in the winter. And she said that that could indeed be the problem. So I've been moisturizing much more, and it has definitely helped. But so this isn't itchy in the way that the swan jumper that I made is itchy, where I have to layer 2 t-shirts under it. All I wore under it when I wore it to Compline last night was just a very thin silk long-sleeved blouse, like the kind that would be completely transparent if I was wearing it on my own. And that was more than enough for me to feel comfortable. But the fact that there is any prickle factor at all means I probably will not use this yarn for any future sweaters because it's a really expensive yarn. I got it on D-Stash, so it was not as expensive for me, but it retails for I think like $12 or $14 for a 50-gram skein of yarn. So that's really expensive for me. Your mileage, of course, might vary. Which is funny because they have such beautiful colors that I was thinking about saving up to do a blue cardigan, but I don't really like wearing cardigans that itch me. Sweaters in general, because I don't like having to layer a lot. Okay, so now that we've got the major disappointment out of the way, I can talk about all the reasons why I love this sweater. I used Custom Fit to get the pattern, and in case you don't know, Custom Fit is a website by Amy Herzog. Come up, Thistle. Up! Of course, I call Thistle up into my lap, so Moth hops there instead. They do get along, but they're kind of like siblings where they get along really well, but then they both want a little more attention. Okay, so back to Custom Fit. So Amy Herzog, she started out as a knitwear designer, and then she's written several books basically helping knitters figure out how to knit sweaters that are going to flatter them as well as fit them. And then she was a computer programmer as well, and so she designed a website that lets you generate patterns based on your own measurements. So you don't have to do any math or conversion, and your own gauge. So you put in various measurements from your body, and it's best to have someone else do those measurements. And then you knit up a gauge swatch, and when you like the fabric, you go ahead and input that, and you get to pick from all these different parameters, and then it costs $10 to generate the pattern, and that's what you knit from. And if you join her website and buy your first pattern within 30 days, then you get a credit for a free pattern. And so I had already generated one, and I had a credit, so that's why I decided to do with this. Her patterns are written in pieces, so everything's flat and seamed, although she does include suggestions for how to knit in the round. Usually I like to seam the body and then do the sleeves in the round, but since there was a lot of alpaca and bamboo in this yarn, I thought it might be better to have the structure of the seams in the sleeves. And I put all the details that I could find and or remember of how I generated the sweater on my project page on Ravelry, because I did change some things. I started with the custom fit close hourglass, like close fit, whichever one. They've got like the snug one, the classic, and then the oversized, and I did the snug one. And then I added a little more ease to the biceps. I remember that. And then I can't remember if I changed any of the ease in the body. And then for the neckline, I opted for a narrow V-neck, because usually when you do a neckline, your neckband fills in, but since this is going to be a collar, it wasn't going to be filled in at all. So that's why I did that. The pattern is just written for a plain stockinette sweater, although you do have a few options for the cuffs and bands, and one of them was twisted ribbing. So the stitch that I added, which is called Broderie Anglaise, and which you can find a link to on my project page. So that I just did on my gauge swatch, and then I just added it in. I can't see if that's focusing. Nope. Whew. Okay, so that's all the basics about the sweater. Oh, and it's got a sailor collar on the back. So this was inspired by the sailor collar dress that Phryne Fisher wears in episode 1 of Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, which is a very fun, feminist 1920s Australia murder mystery show. But it's like cheerful. I know a lot of murder mystery shows are very bleak. This one is not bleak. And Phryne is basically like a superhero. Like, she's not a realistic character, but that's what makes her fun and awesome. Okay. So yeah, she wears a little sailor collar dress that I really liked. Although I ended up doing a much more fitted body than any self-respecting flapper would wear. I need to start a new segment already. Lots of rambling about the sweater, I can see. So originally, this was going to be a jumper, to be more like the sailor collar dress, and then I realized that I was wearing my cardigans, my hand-knit cardigans, much more than I was wearing my hand-knit jumpers, for a variety of reasons that I will discuss shortly. So I ended up just changing the pattern to make it into a cardigan, and that's pretty simple. All you do is you decide the width of your button band, and then you take away that many stitches. So if you want a 7-stitch button band, you take away 7 stitches from the cast on total of your front half. Obviously this is easier if you're knitting it in pieces. And then you divide the remaining number in 2, and that's how many stitches you need to cast on for 1/2. And frequently what you do with the button bands is you knit the entire front piece, and then you do the button bands later. What I did in this case, because I really wanted the button bands to be vertical ribbing, and I was a little worried about whether I could match up the rows well enough to do vertical seaming to knit them on separately afterwards, so I just went ahead and knit the bands with the front pieces. So in that case, what I did was cast on that number plus 7 stitches, which is what I did for my button bands for each half. And I definitely would only knit the button band with the piece if I had a good reason, like in this case wanting the vertical ribbing, because it is a pain to have to, especially on the buttonhole side, because you're doing whatever kind of arm shaping and neck hole shaping, and then you're also having to remember to do a buttonhole every however many rows. And you're kind of stuck with it. Like if you try it on and the button band is a little wavy, you can't just rip it out and do it again on fewer stitches. So I really like the result for this button band, but I definitely plan to mainly do picked up button bands in the future. Just thought I would say that. And in order to get a nice neat edge that matched with the twisted 1x1 ribbing, we'll get there. So this is integrated I-cord, and I included a link to the tutorial I used on my project page. basically what you do is you only knit these stitches every other row. Sorry, I have my camera in face focus mode because I found it works better, but then if it sees my face it switches. Okay, so basically at the beginning of every right side row you knit these 3 stitches, and at the end of every wrong side row you slip them. So it creates this really nice edge. I was a little worried that since I'd only be knitting them every other row, it would end up too, like there wouldn't be all the flexibility that there is in the rest of this sweater, but it worked out perfectly fine. So I would definitely use that method again on something like this. Here, let me unbutton it so you can see. Here's the other side. And then when it came time to bind off at the top of the button bands, which I did as soon as I started the neck shaping, I just did an I-cord bind off to kind of continue that look. Try to hide my face. There we go. Okay. So the custom fit, and Amy Herzog's patterns in general, she's a big believer in putting waist shaping in the middle of the sweater, princess seam style. And so this pattern, I wanted to knit it as much as possible the way the pattern told me to. And so there's no waist shaping at the sides. It's only in the middle. Usually I do a combination, and I have to say I will continue my combination in the future, because for me, just the way my body is, I do go in at the sides for my waist. And so sweaters that go in at the side are perfectly fine. It works with my body. And then, of course, you know, I'm a 30-year-old woman. I have a little bit of a belly. And it seems like putting all the decreases right, kind of princess seam style, makes the sweater hug my belly a little more than the sweaters where I do part of them in the middle and part of them on the side seam. I don't really mind having a belly. To me, it's just part of being an adult woman, as I said. But I also am not sure that I want my sweater to hug my belly when it could be hugging my waist indentation instead. That being said, I'm not sure I've knit well, I guess I've knit jumpers. I haven't knit a cardigan like that's this long. Most of the other cardigans I knit are cropped at the waist. So it might be that it would have hugged my belly either way, and I just haven't knit a sweater quite like this before. So I don't know. I will report the next time I do a sweater this length and do a combination of shaping. But the cool thing is that even though there's no shaping at the side seams, when you put the sweater on, it does still go in at the sides. So it's not like you're straight up and down at the sides. Let's see. What else is there to talk about? Probably the collar. So I had to wing this because I couldn't find any directions for how to do a sailor collar online. So I looked at a bunch of photos of sailor collars, and some of them are square, and then some of them are more the shawl shape. And I decided I wanted the shawl shape. And so when you're doing a regular shawl collar, you use short rows to get that shape. So I wanted to do that, but I also wanted it to lay flat. And so I got out my Knowledgeable Knitter book, and for collars that lay flat, she recommends picking up from the other direction. So when you're doing a normal neckband or collar, you have the right side facing you when you pick up stitches, so that this little selvage line, which is what you get from picking up stitches. Okay, so normally this little line would be on the inside, but because you want the sweater to be flat, you pick up from the opposite. You pick up with the wrong side of the sweater facing you, because that way you don't get a selvage line where it folds. The book also suggested you do one row of reverse stockinette, basically all purls, because that makes the fabric naturally want to curl, and it makes it lie flat without much effort from you. So that's what I did, and it worked really well. And as you can see, you don't really notice the purl bumps in the finished project. I was a little worried about that. And I did use, I think, one size larger needle, because I wanted the collar to be drapier, and then I blocked the heck out of it. Next time I would probably just go up a couple more needle sizes and spare myself blocking it a lot, because I really don't like having to pin everything out and trying to make them symmetrical. I'm not really good at pinning things out. Oh, this was laying on it. Yeah. So Once I had them all picked up, I just did twisted 1 by 1 rib, and as you can see, I only twisted the knit stitches. I didn't bother making this side twisted because it's never going to show, which is much easier. And I just kind of threw some short rows in where it seemed like it would be a good idea. And I got lucky in that my first go worked really well. And then with a lot of the sailor collars, you know, they've got that stripe. And I didn't want to do a stripe, but I did want to do something. So I ended up doing a lateral braid, which is what I used in that shawl that I designed myself last spring and never wrote the pattern for. And I really like how it creates just this little touch of interest, and it also echoes the I-cord bind off in that they're both going in the opposite direction. You can see I put my short rows a little closer together. I put my turns a little closer together than I probably should have, and that's why it's not a perfect curve. But after I blocked it, I decided it looked good enough that I didn't need to redo it. And then I did the same I-cord apply, I don't know, built-in I-cord edging, I think that's what she calls it in the tutorial, just along this little bit that I did on the button band. So once I had done both the front shawl collars and everything was seamed up at this point, I went ahead and did the back of the collar. I went ahead and picked up along the front edge, along the back neckline, and then along the other front edge. And when I was picking up, I paid careful attention, and it took a couple tries to make it so that the line from the lateral braid on the front collar looked continuous in this twisted rib. So I'm pretty pleased with how that turned out. And I wanted to make this stand out so that once again it looked a little bit like a stripe. And I tried a couple things. First I tried slipping it, but that didn't work. And then I thought, okay, maybe I'll do 3 knit stitches together, but that didn't look good either. And finally it occurred to me that I should just do 2 purls instead of 1 purl on each side, because that makes this stitch stand out a little by contrast, because I wanted something subtle. And I'm really pleased with how that worked out. And then I did the same built-in I-cord edging on these and another lateral braid across the bottom and an I-cord bind off. So I wasn't really sure how long I should make this, and I have a skein and then a bit, like I have a full skein that I haven't wound up, and then a bit of the final skein I wound up left over. So I could definitely add some length, because when I'm wearing it, like this looks like it's reasonably long, but then when I'm wearing it, it kind of curves so that it's like that. And the other thing I discovered is once I had blocked it, and I blocked it really straight, and I blocked it strong so that it would be drapier, and it looked straight when I wasn't wearing it, but then when I put it on, it went wavy. And it especially wanted to go up right here. So all I did when I was sewing the buttons on last night is I just ran a basting line right where the lateral braid is so that it stays put along my shoulders. And that was more just a test to see if it would work or not. I mean, it's just regular thread that's been basted. You can see it's already starting to come out. I didn't even tie knots. But it did work really well, so I'm going to go back with some yarn that matches. Or maybe I'll just do thread that matches, because that would be a lot thinner. And sew that, tack that down. So it's still got a little bit of movement here, but that way it's not rippling in the back. And I'm not sure if that's just because of how my back is formed or what. This was all new territory for me. But so that is how I did the sailor collar, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. And let's see, I think that is everything I have to say about the cardigan. As you can see, I did a mattress stitch to seam all the pieces on the inside. It's my favorite way to seam because it looks like magic. One of the side seams I did when I was stressed out, and so it went a little wavy, so I just pulled it out and redid it. But mattress seaming doesn't take very long, so that's nice. And for the buttonholes, I did the Pam Allen round buttonhole method, and her method uses a double yarn over, and usually I don't do the double yarn over, I just do a single yarn over, but because these buttons are a little bigger than I would usually use for this weight of yarn, I'm pretty sure I did a double yarn over so that they would fit. Even though I didn't have these exact buttons, I knew what size they were, and I had the same size buttons in my stash, so I just went ahead and did a test buttonhole to make sure it would fit. So you can see it would. So I didn't want the buttons to be the center of attention. So, and this is a really tricky brown color, but I wanted them to be a similar color brown. And it took a while to find the right ones, because I also wanted them to look luxurious, since this is a sweater named after Phryne, who is known for her very luxurious wardrobe. And so I didn't want plastic buttons. And honestly, it came down to a compromise. I would like these even more if they were just a little bit smaller and more in scale with the sweater, but I thought the glass and then the silver part and the fact that they actually match the brown. Oh, let's see, does this work instead? And it was really difficult to find a brown that matched this shade of yarn. Of course, I was doing all this online, but yeah, so I thought it was worth having slightly bigger buttons than ideal. Apparently, we are not going to focus. There we go. So I'm super pleased with how well the browns match. Obviously, they're darker in person, but that was pretty exciting. And to sew them on, I haven't clipped the ends of the thread yet, so that's why there are some ends. Because I always want to make sure I've gotten the buttons in the right place, so that, you know, if I have to take them off, it's not even more complicated. So I always use 2 strands of thread. I usually use embroidery thread unless I happen to have sewing thread in the right color. Although in the case of shank buttons, it doesn't matter so much. I really like shank buttons for knitwear. First, because I don't have to worry about matching thread color, and secondly, because since hand knits tend to be thicker than store-bought knits, the button needs to be higher off the band. So if you're using a button with holes in it, you have to make a thread shank. Whereas if you're using a shank button, you don't have to bother with that. So, oh, and in case you don't know, a shank button is just the kind that you attach through a loop on the back. That's the shank. Whereas if there were like 4 holes that I'd sewn through on the top, that's the other kind of button. So what I do is I try to sew at least 1/3 to half of the buttons with the same thread so that I have fewer ends to knot. And as I said, I always use 2 strands, and then later I come back and I'll run with a regular sewing needle one of the strands through a stitch and then knot the strands together, because I worry that since hand knit fabric is not as solid as a store-bought fabric would be, you know, like, so this is a knit tube, but a regular knot in sewing thread is not going to come through this, whereas it is going to come, like, it seems like it might come through this. So that's why I do the double thread, so that I can knot around one of the strands of yarn. I just realized I might not be making any sense at all. I apologize for that. But so in order to be able to use the same piece of thread to do multiple buttons without it showing, and the first time I only used 2 strands, like I did 5 buttons and then 4 buttons, but when I cut it off and re-sewed, I had less thread to work with, shorter lengths. So what I do is I run the thread Come on. So if I spread it, you can see I just run the thread up to the next button place, but you don't even see that usually. And then I attach the next button, and then I run the thread up again, and then when it looks like I'm running out, I leave that end and I'll knot that, and I go up to the next one. So that's how I attach my buttons. So far, none of my buttons have fallen off my cardigans, but yeah. Someone asked if I was going to put ribbon on the inside. I've never done that on a cardigan. I've never found that it needed it. I was a little worried because these are glass buttons and they're kind of big, that the weight of them might require a ribbon to stabilize it, but the band stays straight when I wear it, so I don't really see the point of putting the ribbon on. I see the decorative value. I just don't see a practical aspect, so. And I'm not, hand sewing is hard on my body compared to hand knitting, so I tend to save my hand sewing for things like hemming skirts, that kind of stuff, versus sewing pretty ribbons on my cardigans. So those are all the finished objects I'm going to tell you about. And I guess we'll get to the topic, which is some lessons I learned from 2016 and what I plan to knit in the future. And this is mainly going to focus on wardrobe building. So if you're not interested, then bye. But if you are interested, then let's get to that. As I mentioned when I was explaining that I changed my mind on my Phryne sweater and decided to do it as a cardigan instead of a jumper, I have noticed that I'm really wearing my cardigans more this year. And I think that's because I use heating pads to help mitigate my pain and make it so that my body can like partly function. For new viewers, I have chronic illnesses. So basically, I spend a lot of the day on heating pads, but then I get up and I do stuff, and it's a lot colder when you're not on the heating pads. So for me, wool sweaters need to be able to be taken on and off pretty easily. And because of my pain issues, I have a limited range of motion in my neck and shoulders. And pulling clothes on and off over my head is very painful for me. And so I try to only do it, when I'm getting dressed in the morning and then when I'm going to bed at night. So if I'm wearing a wool jumper and I get overheated, then I have to decide whether I would rather just be too hot and probably a little itchy. Because I've also found that if I'm wearing wool and it's very warm, it might itch me in a way that it would not itch me when it was cooler. Anyway, so I have to decide between that or pulling it up over my head and dealing with that pain and then having to put it back on when I get up. So cardigans are much more practical for me. And I will be knitting many more of them in the future versus jumpers. I do think that lace weight jumpers, like the one I'm knitting right now, my Miss Lemon jumper, which is a lace weight knit at like 11 stitches to the inch, I think that'll be fine because that's basically the same weight as kind of store-bought merino sweaters, and I can wear those in the winter on my heating pads and be perfectly comfortable. So I will definitely be looking for more lace weight jumpers when I want to wear a pullover style sweater. Although let me tell you, knitting a sweater at 11 stitches per inch takes a really long time. But that can be good too. Okay, so then the other thing I've noticed is that my heating pads tend to be mainly on my upper half, and so my bottom half can get pretty chilly. And so I think I'm going to look more into knee-high socks. That's why I've already knit one pair, and I've got plans for 3 more pairs, based on stash. And I think it would be really fun to do colorwork leg warmers. I knit a pair of leg warmers back in last January, and I didn't really expect to get that much wear out of them, but I use them a lot. I did not think leg warmers would be a practical category for me, but they are. So I definitely plan to do more of that. And I'm curious about things like knitting skirts. I think a colorwork skirt would be incredible. The only issue with that is I like my skirts full and poofy, so that would be a lot of knitting and a lot of yarn. And I don't really know how I would know how much yarn to buy. So we'll see. I'm also envisioning things like doing like a band of knitted colorwork and then hemming it to a skirt. I think that would be quite lovely too. Or maybe like a headband, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to figure out ways to especially incorporate the kind of yarns that I love working with because they're beautiful, like Alice Starmore Hebridean 2-ply or the Shetland Jameson and Smith or Jameson's. I think they're absolutely beautiful, and I love the effect they have in color work, but I can't wear them next to my skin. I wish I could, but I cannot. So, and for me, if I can't wear fabric next to my skin, I shouldn't knit a sweater out of it. I really hate having to layer a long sleeve under a long sleeve sweater. I know a lot of people do it happily. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it drives me a little crazy. So I wouldn't mind layering a long sleeve woven shirt under a long sleeve cardigan, but unfortunately, most of the long sleeve woven shirts I have are not proper long sleeves. They're more like this, and I think that's because the women's clothing industry has opinions about looks versus practicality, plus it saves them a bit of money to not be using quite so much fabric. So yeah, unfortunately, I am not a very good sewist, so I cannot just magically sew a bunch of long sleeve woven blouses to wear under sweaters, but maybe at some point in the future. So what else have I learned? Oh, so my colorwork vest that I knit, which is out of the Hebridean 2-ply, I wear that a lot. So I definitely, that was another item where I kind of took a chance. I wasn't really sure how a pullover vest would work in my wardrobe. I find it really easy to style and super practical because it's sleeveless. I can wear it over any length sleeve top, and so it's not right next to my skin, but I still get all the prettiness of that wool, and I don't overheat. So I can wear that when I'm on my heating pads, and then when I go out, and get up to do stuff, it still keeps me warm. So I'm really excited about that discovery, and can definitely, that'll be something that I'll do when I want to work with those kinds of beautiful yarns. The other thing I've realized is that cowls are really nice for me because they keep me warm, but they're not quite as warm as a sweater would be. And I really like to layer. It makes me happy. My personal style is very much about that kind of thing. And so if I am a little sad because I can't layer on a big woolly cardigan because I'm going to be on a heating pad. I'm on 2 heating pads at the moment, by the way, and I feel perfectly comfortable in this. Then a lot of times if I wear a cowl and then some mitts with just a long sleeve cotton t-shirt that I've thrifted, that keeps me perfectly comfortable too. And not only does it keep me physically comfortable, but it helps me feel like I still have kind of a fun, quirky personal style. Versus being limited by the fact that I'm on heating pads all the time. So this is I guess this is the 3rd cowl that I've knit. It's the 2nd one that loops twice, which I've noticed is key for me. And I don't actually have that many fingerless mitts because I didn't really used to use them that much, but I've been reaching for the pairs that I do have pretty frequently, and so I do plan to knit a few more pairs of mitts so that I can do that kind of fun layering with my wardrobe. And these are all indefinite plans. I really want to kind of relax with my knitting this year and not worry about getting a lot done, just having knitting there for my enjoyment when I want to knit. I don't know if that makes sense, versus being focused on goals. But yeah, so I'm knitting a pair of mitts to match this cowl now, and I think that that will be another way for me to kind of enjoy my knitwear and not force myself into things that don't actually work with my lifestyle. And maybe a few lighter weight fingering weight hats too that I can wear inside. Yeah, so I think that is most of what I wanted to say as far as wardrobe learning from this last year and plans for the future. As I said, I do seem to be becoming a little more sensitive to wool, and so I will have to take that into account when I am knitting sweaters and stuff in the future. So far, the Quince and Company things that I've knit have never itched me at all. So, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I got some Quince yarn for Christmas. So I think that they will continue to be one of my go-to brands. And then, most of the breeds of sheep that are merino related are perfectly fine for me to wear. It's not like I need to switch to superwash. I'm still up in the air about Blueface Leicester. My BFL sweater, the Thistledown pale pink sweater that I knit last year, I wore all of last winter. I loved it. I never had any issues. This year, it's been really kind of itchy. And for me, because my arms get itchy, that's what makes it hard. If I could just wear a camisole underneath it, that would be fine. It's the arms that are tricky for me. So I want to see, after I've been moisturizing more, whether that affects that. But that also is a woolen spun sweater, whereas all the Quince yarns and this yarn are worsted spun. And I believe that that is a bit less irritating because instead of having the fibers being all jumbled and going every which way, they're all going one way. And so it's less likely to feel prickly. I also wanted to mention that I have a decent sock collection now. I think I have over 20 pairs of hand knit socks, like the regular height, not knee highs. And so I will probably not be knitting many regular pairs of socks this year for me. I might knit some for other people. And who knows, I might change my mind. I'm really focusing on not boxing myself in with my knitting this year. I'm sorry, I just realized how cool the colors have gotten on screen. It's because the sun is almost setting. I've been chatting for too long. But the other thing is, I've noticed that knowing how long it took me to knit a project is not helpful information for me. For instance, with my Phryne sweater, I really enjoyed knitting that. I enjoyed the process of designing it. I enjoyed the process of knitting it. And I wasn't really that worried about it. And then I saw that I had started it in late October and it was now mid-December. And I was like, why haven't I finished this? Oh my gosh. And so I got a little stressed out thinking that I needed to finish it. And so for this year, I am not going to mark what day I start a project on Ravelry. I'm still marking the day I finished it because then they stay in nice chronological order. But yeah, I'm going to save myself that kind of stress and not mark when I start it, which was a little difficult at first, but I think my 2 current works in progress are my 3rd and 4th projects for this year. And so I've gotten used to it now, and I find it really relaxing to not be, monitoring my knitting, if that makes sense. And between Christmas presents and a little bit of shopping at my former local yarn store down in Texas, which always has a wonderful sale right after Christmas, which is so convenient because I'm there. So I got they had quite a bit of their yarn for 40% off retail, and I get to support. They're great people. When I began knitting, that's where I went, and they were very encouraging. So anyway, between all of that, my stash is more than healthy, and so I don't plan to be looking for yarn to buy for quite a while. But I don't feel stressed about my stash. I don't feel obligated to knit it all as fast as possible because, quite frankly, the space it's taking up, I wouldn't use for anything else anyway. And so it can just sit there and waiting its turn. So I'm feeling a lot more relaxed about my knitting this year. I'm not going to make any goals as far as things I want to learn. There are things that I'm interested in, but I don't know. I just want to be more relaxed, and I probably won't be spending as much time on knitting as I did last year for a variety of reasons, and I'm not really sure how that will impact the podcast yet. So we will see how that works out. I definitely won't stop podcasting. It's just a question of how much material I will have to podcast. Although, as you can see, I managed to get a lot of talking out of 3 finished objects, so it might or might not be an issue. We will see. But yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about for 2017. And I'm just really looking forward to having a relaxed knitting year. And yeah, spending a little more time on other areas of my life. So I hope that everyone had a wonderful holiday season, or just time off work, or if you're in a part of the world where you don't get time off work, just an enjoyable end of December, early January. And it's so nice to be talking with you again, and I always look forward to hearing from you. So if you want to leave comments here on YouTube or on Instagram, I am the Charm of It, or in the Ravelry group, which is also the Charm of It, and I always include all the links for that in the down bar. I absolutely love to hear all of that, so I'm very grateful to everyone who takes the time to reach out to me, because I started this podcast in order to find knitting friends, and it has succeeded beyond my wildest expectations, but I'm always open to new knitting friends, so don't feel shy. I know I always felt shy before I started podcasting, especially about contacting podcasters who had quite a few followers. And I mean, I'm not a mega podcaster or anything like that, but I'm just saying, if you would like to reach out, feel free, because I am always interested in meeting fellow knitters. And now the sun has almost completely dipped behind the horizon, so I will let you go. Bye! See you soon!